Good afternoon, everyone. I'm told that here they put the hymns up quite high on the projector today, so your necks would get used to this angle for such a tall speaker. So I adjust the microphone a little bit. It's always a pleasure to be back here in the UK, and it was wonderful to think back about the feast and have that in accord here today. For those of you who are paying attention, you might have seen my wife and I in one of those pictures, and our daughter. We were in New Zealand for the feast this year, which was a lovely experience. First time that we've had the opportunity to go there. We had beautiful weather, and there were many families there in that area with young children the same age as ours, which was a treat for them, and they made lots of new friends, lots of activities and such there. My children my oldest is 10, about to turn 11 in a couple of weeks, Edward, and then William is 9, and our daughter Audrey is 7. And they were all born here in the UK. We moved back to the US shortly after Audrey was born, about 7 years ago. So it's interesting to reflect on how time flies. I lived in the UK for 11 years almost, and then now 7 years back in the States. So hard to believe that span of time has flown by. This trip came up rather suddenly for me. Last Friday, I had a work situation arise where I needed to be in Geneva next week on Monday and Tuesday. And so I thought, well, I don't want to fly all the way across the Atlantic and miss the opportunity to see everyone here in the UK, my colleagues, of course, as well as all of you in the congregation and my friends here. The preparation and travels ended up being a bit more exciting than usual, or stressful than usual, in that on Friday last week, when I booked my trip, I had my passport out to put all of my details into the airlines, and then placed it in my travel bag, ready to go for a flight I'd booked for Tuesday night this week to come over to London. And then later that afternoon, cleaning some in the house. We had a church preteen activity at our house Saturday night last week. And as I was cleaning, vacuuming around the house, I found some bits of paper. And a little bit farther, I found one of my dogs, who's full of mischief, got into my travel bag, found my passport, and thought it tasted delicious, and chewed a large corner off of it. So I had a mild freak-out moment and looked at what are my options here. Traveling with a damaged passport. Google informed me that was not a good idea, and so I had to get an emergency replacement this last week for my passport. And as I was researching that, determined that Monday was a bank holiday in the US, Veterans Day, and so all the government offices are closed. It's not a bank holiday for normal people, just the government's taking the day off, but so I needed an appointment on Tuesday, and the closest one available to me is in the next state over, in Arkansas. So I traveled to Arkansas, I got a passport, and raced back to get my flight Tuesday night, but the connections didn't work out. And so I ended up having an extra night at home and then flew on Wednesday to come here, arriving Thursday morning. So a bit of an adventure this week. My wife and colleagues at work found it a highly entertaining story right from the beginning. I'm appreciating it more now that it has been successfully resolved, but be quite a story for years to come, I'm sure. So I'm the proud bearer of a brand new passport and another 10 years to go on that. Well, as I mentioned, it is a sudden trip to come up. But of course, part of the draw for me is the opportunity to come back. I'm so grateful that my work brings me back to this area on a regular basis, usually at least once or twice a year, and it's always a treat to reconnect with friends and brethren. That brings me to the topic I want to cover in the sermon message today. I want to talk about one of the great gifts we have in this life, which is friends. friends. I once heard a saying regarding friendship that's always stuck with me. It was that friends make the good times better and the bad times not so bad. Question for you: how did you meet your best friend? Or some of your best friends? Perhaps you grew up together since you were little children. Maybe you met later in life. Did you hit it off right away? Or did it take some time for your friendship to grow? Do you have the same sense of humor? Maybe dry or sarcastic, witty, highbrow, lowbrow, slapstick. Maybe you enjoy puns, as some do. Have you laughed so hard with one of your friends that your cheeks hurt and you could barely breathe? Or perhaps your friendships grew through many shared experiences. Sometimes going through hardship together can be the crucible in which strong and lasting friendships are formed, and everything in between. I remember my best friend in high school came home. He was a few years older than me. He'd gone off to, we happened to go to the same school together, and we were in the church together growing up. He went on to Ambassador College, and he came home one summer with his girlfriend that he'd met and later married. And we had a weekend together. And his girlfriend grew up on the other side of the country. I lived in Washington State, which is in the far northwest part of the United States, near Canada. And his girlfriend was from Boston in Massachusetts, opposite sides of the continental United States. And so it came back and we thought, what can we show around this area where we grew up? What would be something special to share a bit of this region and area with my friend's girlfriend? And so we decided on a whim that, hey, let's drive over to Seattle. It's a few hours away, about a 3-hour drive from where we were, and we'll see some of the sights around the city, and we're just gonna hop in the car, and this was on maybe a Saturday night. So we're gonna go over. We didn't have a booking for a hotel or anything. We'll just find something on the side of the road, place to stay the night and see some of the sights the next day and come home. So we drive, and as we get into the city, we find likely looking hotel. We stop off the side of the road, ask, is there a room available? No. Oh, okay, that's surprising. We'll go to the next exit, a little farther up the road. We try the next hotel. No, nothing available. Okay, third hotel. Nope, they chuckle at us. Is there anything else around that you know of? Absolutely not. Seafair is happening. We're like, we have no idea what that is. We've never heard of it. Turns out, huge festival. All the rooms are booked for miles around, hours in every direction. And so our adventure turned into a long car ride to Seattle and back in the same evening. And the first hotel with vacancy we saw was about 2 miles from my friend's house that we returned to by the next morning. So we had a long trip to nowhere, but had great fun listening to songs and talking about our adventures. And it's turned into a humorous story that we can share and laugh about many years later, much as I hope my passport being chewed up by my dog will turn into here in the weeks and months and years ahead. Perhaps you have some stories of some of your best friends, of plans gone awry, or things that turned out a little bit differently than expected. Of course, as we get older, many good friends are separated by life, work, family, geography. People spread out in different directions. But when we get a chance to get back together with our great friends, it often feels like no time has passed at all. I want to turn over to Proverbs chapter 18, verse 24. It's a verse which comments on the topic of friendship. It's the last verse in this chapter. Proverbs 18, verse 24. It says, "A man who has friends must himself be friendly, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother." Proverbs 18:24. The first part of this verse reminds us in some ways of the golden rule. To have and maintain good friendships, we have to treat people in a good and friendly way. And the second part reminds us of the value of a true friend. We can't pick our families that we grow up in. Some are blessed with great family circumstances. Some family members can be a real challenge or be absent altogether. But this verse reminds us that it's possible to build the depth of friendship that is even greater than that of family. I hope most of you have been or will be blessed with a friend like this in your life. As I was reflecting on this topic, I realized I likely don't need to provide any time in my message today with instructions on how to spend time and have fun with your friends. That comes pretty naturally to all of us. I expect you've got that part of friendship figured out pretty well on your own. But sometimes being a friend isn't all fun and games. Sometimes you have a friend who's going through a significant trial in their life or a series of trials. Sometimes you have a friend who gets off track in life. And sometimes we can get off track ourselves, which can have a negative impact on our relationships, including our friendships. Today, I want to spend a little time exploring the serious side of friendship. And I've entitled this message, "The Duties of a Friend." The duties of a friend. As we start to explore this topic today, I want to start with a common situation, perhaps. What if your friend is going through a trial? What if your friend is going through a trial? As we all know, trials come in different shapes and sizes, whether your friend is in the church or not. People have work trials, school trials, health trials, housing trials, financial trials, family trials, different relationship trials. And of course, these types of trials are just time and chance. They could happen to anyone, including to one of our friends. So, how can you support your friend when they're facing a serious trial? I want to turn over to an example we find in Scripture in Job chapter 2. Job chapter 2, and we know Job went through some serious trials, far beyond what is common. I want to look at an example here that we see in the last few verses of this chapter, Job chapter 2. Let's pick it up in verse 11 here, and we'll read down to the end of the chapter. Job 2, verse 11, down through verse 13. It says, "Now when Job's 3 friends heard of all this adversity, the trials that had come upon him, each one came from his own place, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite." Great names there if anyone's expecting sons. Looking for name ideas in the Scriptures rolls right off the tongue, doesn't it? They say, "For they had made an appointment together to come and mourn with him and to comfort him." Verse 12, "When they raised their eyes from afar, they did not recognize him. They lifted their voices and wept. Each one tore his robe and sprinkled dust on his head towards heaven." Verse 13, "So they sat down with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word, for they saw that his grief was very great." It's interesting. Job had these 3 good friends, came to mourn with him and to comfort him. That it is interesting, they sit silently with him for 7 days. To me, reading this verse, it feels a bit like a Men Are From Mars kind of example. Perhaps you remember that book many decades ago, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, dealing with some stereotypes of men and women and how they handle different things. Guys who are going through a tough time sometimes like to get together with a friend and not talk about it. Perhaps you've noticed that. Just do something else for a little while and let the subconscious ruminate on it in the background. And of course, like Job, they will talk about it too when they're ready, oftentimes in less than 7 days. And of course, this is just a stereotype. While it may be true for many, it's not true for all. There are certainly some women who also prefer time to think things through before discussing a difficult trial with a friend. But regardless of how long it takes, when they're ready to talk, we can be a good friend by listening with empathy and with compassion for what they're going through. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give and provide our friend is to just listen and let them know that we care. As the old saying goes, a problem shared is a problem halved. Of course, this is also a great opportunity to provide some encouragement. One of the most encouraging things that we can do is an offer by way of help is to pray for our friends when they're going through difficult times and trials. I won't turn there, but James 5 and verse 16 reminds us to pray for one another, and that the effective, fervent prayer of a righteous man avails much. It really does make a difference. I also think it's important to let your friend know that you will be praying for them and what you'll be asking God to help them with. Being specific makes this statement so much more powerful and encouraging. If you think about a situation, say your friend is going through a trial and you tell them, "Oh, I'm praying for you." That's nice, that's helpful and encouraging, but think if you told your friend, "I'm praying for God to give you strength and wisdom and peace of mind as you face this challenging situation," whatever it might be. That has a lot more impact and power, right, than just, "I'm praying for you." Being specific about what we're praying about shows a level of compassion and empathy and connection that provides a lot more encouragement and support to our friend in their time of need. While we're still here in Job, let's go a little farther in Job's story here, over to chapter 6. You see a comment here from Job, chapter 6, verse 14. Job says here, "To him who is afflicted, kindness should be shown by his friend, even though he forsakes the fear of the Almighty." That's interesting. Kindness should be shown by friends to friends, even when one is going astray. Well, what does Job mean here? Let's drop down a bit to verse 24 in this same chapter. We're still in Job chapter 6. Verse 24, Job says, "Teach me, and I will hold my tongue. Cause me to understand wherein I have erred." We see here that Job expected his friends to explain his mistake if he was making one. He was counting on that feedback from them. This leads to another topic to consider under the duties of a friend. What if your friend is making a mistake? What if they're sinning? Let's turn over to James chapter 5. James chapter 5. We're going to look at verses 19 and 20 here. The last two verses in this chapter, James chapter 5. Starting in verse 19, James writes here, he says, "Brethren, if anyone among you wanders from the truth, and someone turns him back, let him know that he who turns a sinner from the error of his way will save a soul from death and cover a multitude of sins." These verses here remind us what our motivation should be if we see a friend getting off track. It's definitely not fun, but if we truly love our friend, verse 20 reminds us that for our friends in the church, our converted friends, this is a matter of eternal life and death. And the verse goes on to show the good result, a friend saved from death and covering a multitude of sins. Interestingly, this covering of sin referenced at the end of this verse may apply to both parties here, both you and your friend. For your friend, obviously, repenting and getting back on track with God cuts off a whole path of sin that they were going down previously. And as for you, God indicates a blessing for those who love their neighbors as themselves. I'm sure every one of us would welcome an extra portion of mercy when our day of judgment comes. Now, one other verse that speaks to this duty of a friend is found over in Proverbs chapter 27. Turn with me there if you would. Proverbs chapter 27. And let's look at verse 6 here together in this chapter. Proverbs 27, verse 6. It says, "Faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful." Faithful are the wounds of a friend. This verse reminds us that true friends are faithful, even when they have to share something that's hard to hear. It may even hurt a little bit to hear. You know, your friends can get all sorts of people. At work, certainly on the internet, to flatter them and agree with them on any idea they come up with. But those people don't necessarily truly care about them. They have their own agendas. We see this in society around us, people with all sorts of ideas, concepts on how they want to live their own life, choose their own way, even contrary to God's way and law and what we know brings a successful and happy life. And they'll find plenty of people out there who will cheer them on every step of the way. And sometimes a friend has to point out the error in that line of thinking. A faithful friend certainly does. Let's drop down a little bit farther in this same chapter. Verse 17 of Proverbs chapter 27. This is a very well-known verse on friendship. It tells us, as iron sharpens iron, so a man sharpens the countenance of his friend. You are not sharpening the countenance of your friend by going along and acting like everything is fine when they slip up and are sinning. If you're going to be a faithful friend, a friend worth having in good times and in bad times, then, as I'm reminded on the trains in this country, if you see something, you have to say something. See it, say it, sort it. So how do you approach having a difficult conversation of this type? It's not easy. While we're here in Proverbs, let's go over to Proverbs 15, verse 1. This is a verse that is known very well. It reminds us that a soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. soft answer turns away wrath. A harsh word stirs up anger. If we're having a conversation with a friend about a topic like this, stirring up anger is not helpful to the conversation. We need to take the time to pray, to meditate, to consider our words very carefully in order to ensure that we're coming to our friend with a soft answer, with a very loving and supportive spirit. Your friend and your friendship are at a delicate stage here, and it's absolutely worth doing your preparation in order to seek the best outcome. Of course, Matthew 18 also gives us some principles to consider on this topic, especially if your friend has sinned against you. Let's turn over there and remind ourselves of the advice we see here from Jesus Christ. You see, starting in verse 15, we'll read down to verse 17 here, these verses that Jesus records for us. Matthew 18, starting in verse 15. Moreover, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. And if he hears you, you've gained your brother. Verse 16 says, but if he will not hear you, take with you one or two more, that by the mouths of 2 or 3 witnesses every word may be established. And verse 17, and if he refuses to hear them, then tell it to the church. But if he refuses even to hear the church, let him be to you like a heathen and a tax collector. So we see kind of this escalation path. But the most important part is right at the start, verse 15. First, we should always try and handle any problems that arise in a relationship, including a friendship, privately. And then we only involve others when it's truly necessary. Of course, this is good advice regardless of the nature of your friend's sin, and one that I think is often followed in the church. I believe the vast majority of these situations that arise are handled privately and successfully, compared to the very few which escalate to become a matter for others to be involved with, or even to the church. I think this is also a good principle to reinforce as parents, or if we have leadership responsibilities in church or in our work or other things. You will often get someone coming to you with a complaint about another person. And I highly recommend an early question in that conversation is, have you discussed it with the other person? And encouraging that to happen first. Oftentimes, it has not. It's human nature. People often want to avoid this step. It feels scary. It can be scary. But it is also the path that has the greatest opportunity for success, the greatest possibility for a successful and healing outcome. And it's certainly something worth praying carefully about, choosing your words carefully, and attempting before expanding the discussion of an issue or complaint to more people. Now, let's flip this topic on its head for a moment. What if you're the one who's making the mistake? What if you're the one who's sinning? Wait a minute, that would be impossible, right? Because you're perfect. Oh, wait. No one is perfect. You or me. Only Jesus Christ lived a perfect life as a human being. Which means, over the passage of time, this is bound to come up eventually in all of our lives, to everyone, to each of you and to me. We therefore have to recognize we all need and deserve correction from time to time. Now, our natural reaction to criticism is often to become defensive. It's part of our human nature, but not necessarily a pretty part of our human nature, and one that we should learn to control. I remember hearing a sermon many years ago. I forget who the speaker was, but he described this as being a measuring stick that all of us can use, or a bit of a gauge on the dashboard of your automobile. That how do you respond to criticism is a test. And it's a way for you to perceive your Christian maturity. This is the carnal mind can be very quick to get defensive or to counterattack when receiving criticism. A spiritual mind, a godly mind, should be able to receive that peaceably. And we need to appreciate, especially if a friend has the courage to come to us in a situation with correction, we need to appreciate that person is trying to look out for us, to be their brother's keeper. That isn't always an easy job. The correction being offered, of course, may be accurate or it may be inaccurate. If the correction offered is inaccurate, it's not a correct understanding of the situation, are you then justified in acting in an unchristian way in your response? Being guiltier of sin than the person coming to you with an incorrect understanding? Let's walk through a few possibilities here, at least in theory. Let's say, on one hand, the person offering the feedback to you is in fact correct. I think of Nathan, the prophet, coming to David and telling him this story of the rich man stealing the poor man's lamb. David, angry, upset, knows just what to do, pronounces his judgment. This man should die. And Nathan says, it's you. Ooh. What a light bulb moment that must have been. And we see, thankfully, David realized a lot of people, the defenses come up, the counterattack comes up, they're going to justify themselves, rationalize the situation, maybe compound their error and make it worse, shoot the messenger, all the different tactics that are well known in this space. Thankfully, David did demonstrate a repentant heart. And that starts with taking ownership of the problem, right? If your friend comes to you and you realize they're correct, it's true, we found the problem and it's me, right? In this situation, we have to acknowledge it and work to correct the problem. Of course, that is easier to do if the person approaches you softly and kindly and packages it very nicely for your consideration. But even if the approach isn't the best, we should be wise and accept it. You and the person may pray for each other and grow and develop a closer relationship for having gone through that situation. Now let's consider the inverse for the moment. What if they come to you and the correction they're offering or feedback they're offering is in fact incorrect? Well, you could certainly offer additional information, context, where the person sees that he or she had a misunderstanding or an incorrect assessment of the situation. And even if the person still believes you're wrong, you can tell him or her that although you don't see it the same way that they do, you'll carefully consider their input, and you can thank them for coming to you anyway. That would be a very spiritually mature way to handle a situation like that. Now, here's where it gets really complicated. Many times, the situation is not so black and white. It's a mixture of the two, right? It's not often that you get a situation where the discussion is 100% correct or 100% incorrect. There's often a mixture, maybe some correct understanding, some inaccuracies or misunderstandings. The mature thing for us to keep in mind in these situations is for us not to throw out the kernel of truth just because it's packaged in some inaccuracies. Regardless of the mix, we need to learn to receive this kind of feedback gracefully, peaceably, to pray and reflect on it when those situations arise and we receive it. Now, we've talked about a variety of situations here today. You've probably thought about a number of different friends that you've had over the years, maybe some friends that you have currently, as we've talked through some of these scenarios. But I'd like us to consider one more friend today as we think about this topic, and that happens to be a friend that each and every one of us share. Let's turn over to John chapter 15. This is the Gospel of John, chapter 15, and let's look at verse 15 here together. A few words from Jesus Christ. John 15 and verse 15, Christ says here, "No longer do I call you servants, for a servant does not know what his master is doing, but I've called you friends, for all things that I've heard from my Father I've made known to you." Jesus Christ here is saying he's brought us into the circle. He's shared with us the words and the plan of the Father, and how wonderful it's been to have just kept the Feast of Tabernacles here a month ago. As I was outside briefly last night, I saw a full moon hanging in the sky once again, reminding us just 1 month ago we were at the start of the Feast of Tabernacles. And we were rehearsing that plan of God and what is to come and the exciting future that he has in store for us and for all of mankind. We're greatly looking forward to that. Now, our friend here, Jesus Christ. Thankfully, we never have to worry about our friend, Jesus Christ, sinning. But he takes his duty as a friend to us very seriously. Notice Revelation chapter 3. Revelation chapter 3 and verse 19. Here we see these are the messages to the churches, the 7 churches in Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey. This is the message that he gives to the church of Laodicea. In verse 19, he says, "As many as I love, I rebuke and chasten. Therefore, be zealous and repent." As many as I love. Do you think Jesus Christ loves his friends? He absolutely does. He loves each and every one of us. While we were still sinners, he died for us. And this advice that he gives here, he points out, as many as I love, I rebuke and chasten. We just established he loves all of us. That means he rebukes and chastens all of us from time to time. Therefore, because of that, be zealous and repent. Now, some may also look at this and say, well, that's advice to a subset of the church. That's just to the church in Laodicea, not for me, right? So we notice every one of these messages to the 7 churches ends with Jesus Christ saying, he who has an ear. Everybody in the room have ears? Yep, I'm looking around the room. I see ears on every one of you. That's all of us. I bet on the webcast too. You all have ears as well. So who has an ear? All of us. Let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches, plural. Not he who has an ear, let him figure out which church he's a part of and then find out which part of the message applies to them. No. All of the message to all 7 churches are for all of us to learn from in this example. As many as I love, verse 19, I rebuke and chasten, Jesus Christ says. Are you listening to Jesus Christ? When was the last time you realized Jesus Christ was correcting you? Do you have a tender heart that's willing to listen and learn and take that correction in a proper spirit? He offers this correction to us because he wants us to be part of his family forevermore. Let's turn over to Hebrews chapter 12. Hebrews chapter 12. We see a few verses here in verses 5 through 8 that expand a bit on those words of Christ we just read in Revelation 3. Notice Hebrews 12, starting at verse 5. The writer of Hebrews here says, and you have forgotten the exhortation which speaks to you as to sons, someone who's dearly beloved. My son, do not despise the chastening of the Lord, nor be discouraged when you're rebuked by him. For whom the Lord loves, he chastens and scourges every son whom he receives. In a way, these verses are reminding us how we should control and overcome our human nature, our carnal mind. The carnal mind often does despise chastening of any kind, is discouraged by correction from human beings or from Jesus Christ. But you think of a parent providing proper discipline and support and encouragement to their children. We see plenty of examples in society around us of parents who choose not to correct their children in any way, and what a disservice that does to their children over time. It does not yield good fruit. God our Father, Jesus Christ, our older brother and friend, he wants us to be wildly successful, part of his very family forevermore. And just as a loving parent or family member, that does mean occasional correction along the way in order for us to reach our potential. Verse 7, if you endure chastening, God deals with you as sons. For what son is there whom a father does not chasten or correct? Verse 8, but if you are without chastening, of which all have become partakers, then you are illegitimate and not sons. If we want to be members of the family of God, now and forevermore, this is part of the deal, right, that we've signed up for. And in some ways, it's pointed out here, it's evidence of our legitimate membership within the family of God. If God didn't do that for us, it would be evidence that he didn't love us or care about us as a true family member. And so in a way, this is an area where we have to shift our perspective from a purely human perspective that hates correction, hates being told what to do by anyone else, who gets defensive or counterattacking in situations like this, and recognize that the ultimate loving parent, the ultimate loving older brother, the ultimate friend is here, loves us deeply, cares about us deeply, and offers this correction because of that deep love and their desire for our success, our happiness, the peace and benefit of great friendships and relationships now and even greater into the future, in the life to come, in the coming kingdom of God, both through the millennium and serving our roles as kings and priests and into life forevermore as part of God's family. You know, having close friends is a lot of fun. It brings great joy in our lives. But as we've seen in the message today, being a friend also brings some responsibilities. Whether it's supporting our friend through a tough trial or bringing up a sensitive topic when they make a mistake and sin. And, of course, we've reviewed our responsibility to receive our friends gracefully when we're the ones who've made the mistake, when we're the ones who've slipped up. And we've also noted that this friendship includes Jesus Christ, who calls us his friends, who's shared the plans that the Father has revealed to him with all of us, and is working with each of us to help us make it, to be part of that wonderful future that God plans and has in store for all those who remain faithful. As we conclude, I want to remind you of the first verse we read as we started this message today. That was in Proverbs 18:24, and it said, "To have friends, we must be friendly." But upon our review today, I think we could expand that a little bit. Say, if we want true friends, if we want faithful friends, if we want great friends in our lives, then we must fulfill our duties and be a true friend, a faithful friend, and a great friend. And if we do, we can all make the most of this wonderful blessing in our lives of friendship.